All right, hello and welcome to our podcast on Flashback, another one of our literary terms that we're looking at this year. Let's go ahead and get right into this. So what exactly is a flashback? It is basically a break in the chronological order of a story to go back in time to fill in some gaps, to tell another part of the story, or to reveal some other part. And so the example that we give down there to start looking at is if the dark orange is kind of the current chronological time, perhaps we are waking up Monday morning and seeing the breakfast table being set, and then all of a sudden we get this weird time shift where it seems to be Friday night at some sort of party thing. And then we jump back to where we originally started, back to our breakfast table, and you can see our main character getting in trouble on Monday afternoon. When all of the facts of Friday night have been revealed, you can see that happening in that order. And so the party on Friday night scene is told out of order. Truly, the story is happening on Monday, but for whatever reason, the author has chosen to flashback to Friday to give us a glimpse as to why they are getting in trouble on Monday. For example, we've seen the story To Kill a Mockingbird, where at the very beginning, we know it's being told in flashback because it starts with something to the effect of, when Jem was 12, he broke his arm. He said it was due to something else. I thought it was due to something else. Right away, things are being told in the past tense. So we know that this story is being told way after things happened. Then we see that the author breaks chronology and jumps back in time to start telling us where the story truly began that caused Jem to break his arm. And so if we're paying attention there, we know at some point we have to see that Jem broke his arm, but we're also going to see it being told from where that whole story began. Another example whatever comes from chain of events led Wicked, up to him. The very first lines of the musical say, "Good news, she's dead. The Witch of the West is dead. The wickedest witch there ever was. The enemy of all of us here in Oz is dead." Okay, well, if you know that this is the story of the two witches, Glinda the Good Witch and Elphaba the Wicked Witch of the West, before Dorothy came and before the Wizard of Oz, there's no way that you can start the play with a main character dead. And therefore, you have to realize that we are seeing the starting of the play actually at the end. We know the end, that the Wicked Witch is going to be killed off somehow, but we need to find out how. And so the entire musical backs up to that beginning of the chain of events to explain how did these two get to know each other, how did they grow up, and ultimately how did the Wicked Witch of the West die. We know the ending from the start, but we have to flash back to get the whole chain of events. So why do we need to know this? Writers use flashbacks for a variety of reasons. One might be to create excitement. For example, in the other two texts we just talked about, we know the ending. We know that there's going to be some sort of trauma, somebody breaking an arm, somebody dying. But now we need to back up and figure out how that chain of events started and all of the things that led up to that point. Perhaps they're using flashback to reveal certain things. Perhaps they're going to tell us, give us some background of one of these characters to explain why he or she does something, but they're going to show us as an audience in flashback. They're going to say, oh, this person is really afraid of the water. Well, why are they afraid of the water? Because back at some point previous to when the story was taking place, they had some trauma around it. And so they might show that to us in flashback. Very similar to this, they might use this to fill in any gaps of background knowledge of the story. Again, maybe there's something that the character's doing that we need to flash back in time to see why they are doing it right now. A big thing is that if we're just reading along, kind of passively reading, and all of a sudden we find ourselves and our movie voice kind of stopping, that might cause us to lose comprehension. Because all of a sudden our movie voice is saying, wait a second, this, they were just walking down the beach or something, and now all of a sudden we're back here, 50 years earlier in Europe. What happened? Where did that go wrong? where did my understanding of the story break down? The author is probably using a flashback to explain something, to give us background, but if we're not paying attention, our movie voice is going to get confused. We are creating the story from the two characters walking down the beach, and we miss the flashback back to the point where the author chose to explain something else. And so we have to question, what is real time for this story? What is really going on? And then what is a flashback? What is that technique to help us better understand the current time? So how do we see flashbacks? I think in movies and TV, it's a little bit easier to see flashbacks. So that's probably where we're going to start our look at flashback. Some techniques they use. The first one there is to fade to black. They're going to fade out of the current time and then fade into some other scene. That fade is a pretty slow transition. It makes it very obvious that they are changing time, either forward or backward. And oftentimes, filmmakers are nice enough to put some sort of text at the bottom to say, 5 years previously, or the other day. So not only do they fade, but they give us some text track to help us understand where we're at. They might create some sort of a dream sequence where the screen becomes fuzzy, becomes wavy, maybe closes in an iris, something like that, and then fades into something previous. Oftentimes, they're going to help us out by, again, putting that text track, or perhaps showing us a time period's very distinctive clothing. For example, oftentimes when movies fade to the 1980s, the 80s were a very distinctive time period in terms of the clothing worn. So the filmmakers will probably show us things like parachute pants, the Michael Jackson jacket that had all the zippers, distinctive hairstyles. They might help us out by having some music from the time period playing in the background. All of those things are going to help us know that we have jumped back in time. Then the last one is the idea of parallelism, that perhaps we're going to see the current time moving along, and then we're going to get a straight cut to a previous time. But one way that they might help us out in a straight cut is to have the same character begin that new flashback. And so as we make the transition from the visual medium into the written word, this is where flashbacks become a little bit more difficult. So some things that they might use to help us understand that they are jumping back in time could be things that parallel the idea of a fade to black, fade up at a previous time. And the first thing might be the use of an ellipsis, so the 3 dots, where maybe a paragraph ends and kind of trails off in some sort of ellipsis. That lets us know that time is slowing down, maybe the narrator is slowing down to think, maybe the character is thinking, and if they are thinking and maybe going into some sort of dreamlike state, perhaps the next thing that comes out in the book is going to be a flashback. Number 2 and 3 kind of look at the same thing, basically using the word back. The boy thought back to a similar time. Well, we're probably going to see what that similar time is. Number 4 kind of goes with the idea of the parallel idea, similar to the film version, where we get something to the effect of, Johnny, though, was as nervous as he was when... And so maybe rather than just tell us when, at a previous game, when he was younger, when he was in Little League, the author might choose to go ahead and show us in a little bit more scene. And so that is kind of the similar aspect to the parallel use in film. Number 5 down there might be the idea of a complete random break in the action. It seems like your story is just moving along merrily at some time period in some setting in some location, and then all of a sudden you get this absolutely disjoint part that could be just the author jumping to a parallel set of action. That could also be the author trying to flash back to something. Again, the points of flashback are to give us more information, to explain something, maybe to do some sort of subtle reveal of another detail that will help explain future events. But if we're merrily reading along and things just absolutely stop and break and become completely different, there is a strong possibility that a flashback is being used. And again, if we're reading actively, we should be signaling, hey, something's weird here. I need to pay extra close attention. The move from film flashbacks to text flashbacks is often a little bit more difficult, but I think if you can focus on these ideas here, that will help you to figure out where the flashback is. That's about it. As always, please bring in your notes and questions to class. Let us know if anything was unclear, and we will start applying this right away with some new texts and see if we can figure out what the flashbacks are, why the authors are using that, and then ultimately, how is that use of flashback helping us understand the story and, of course, the theme, the point of all novels. Thanks again for listening. Have a good one, and we'll see you in class.